Okay.
Go.
Okay, take it away, Matt.
Awesome, thank you. I'd just like to say hello to everybody on the call and welcome to the Practice Facilitator Monthly webinar. Hope everyone's staying warm in the frigid weather that we have. It's definitely a trek getting to work this morning. We have quite a bit of content today, so I think I'll just shoot right through these first couple of slides so we can get started. Could I get the next slide, please? Just to remind everyone on the call, the vision, mission, and values of the Practice Facilitator Network. Every Practice Facilitator is supported to facilitate implementation of the patient's medical home, build a culture of continuous quality improvement, and our values that we have listed is evidence-based, collaboration between practice facilitators, establish connections, safe patient care, and to have joy in work. So, just to go through some of the technical stuff really quick, if you're having trouble with the chat, I know there might be a little glitch today, and if you don't see it working for any reason, try to send a message to the host, or if you have a really burning question that you'd like to have answered, you can always email it to pfadmin@albertadoctors.org, and we can make sure that it's posted up when the presentation gets uploaded to the website, and get an answer for you. So just to start off, if we could get everyone to type into the chat if it's working, the name, organization, where you are in the province, that'd be awesome. I know I'm still not getting the option to type to all participants, so I think we could just probably go to the next one. So just a reminder, the PCN Strategic Lead Forum is coming up in February. This year the theme is Scaling the Patient's Medical Home. It's going to be located in Calgary on February 7th and 8th. The agenda is now up on the website. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to email pcnforum@albertadoctors.org. And just to clarify that this is an invitation for both practice facilitators and PCN physician champions and executive directors or leadership in the PCN. So keep in mind that's coming up. There's also
Matt, sorry, Matt, it's Michelle. I don't know, Emily had asked if I would speak to,
sorry.
to this. So you did a brilliant job on the first one, so not much to add there. Great, thank you. I guess just basically to say that we're trying a new approach this year, and this is step one in leading to an even more special conference in 2021. Just to give you a little bit of a teaser, and basically for this one we're combining the best of the former Strategic Leadership Forum and Change Agent Day. So for those of you who've come to Change Agent in the past, I know people have been asking when's the next one, what's happening with it. We're PDSing, doing a combo. And so you'll notice there'll be a lot of the favorite components of the forum, but mixed in will be some of the favorite components of Change Agent, like a more practical, interactive, and fun approach in parts. And that there may have been some confusion, we know, with this when it went out, because when directors heard the term forum, they were automatically assuming that it was going to be the same forum, but it's actually different, and that's why we're specifically inviting practice facilitators to come and join, because we really want to see what happens when we bring everybody together, and we think it's going to be an even more powerful event. And the theme, of course, is taking PMH to scale across Alberta. So practice facilitators play an enormous role in that, so we think it's really important that you're represented at this particular one. All right. Then if you can go to the next one. Something else we're trying that's brand new is adding a pre-conference workshop to bring practice facilitators and physician champions together to learn and collaborate. And it's also something we want to be offering you more skills advancement opportunities at least a couple times a year so you can continue to add tools to your toolbox. I know you get a lot of them from this webinar. This is another opportunity to get together physically and build your toolkits. And as we know, all of us, one of the biggest challenges that we face with PMH is engagement. So this first interactive workshop, we're going to be talking about the science of engagement with a particular emphasis on brain-based and human behavior approaches. And I had the opportunity to do some courses in the area of executive coaching. And so I really want to pull on some of these really exciting and interesting things that I learned and share them with you in this 4-hour workshop. So we're going to talk about things like techniques to create relationships and trust and psychological safety with physicians and clinic teams. And because it will be really interactive, we've capped it at 60. So registration is still open if you can get your name on the list. We have a great venue in Calgary, really different venue. I think it'll be really conducive to creativity. And I think it's going to be a really fun day. So I hope you can come.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks,
and then could I just ask the other speakers, if it's not your turn to speak, could you just put yourself on mute? We are getting a little bit of feedback there. So, if you've been on one of these calls in the last couple months, then you know we do this poll everywhere now, just to get a kind of sense for the rest of the call. So if you want to go to pollev.com/PFN331 or text PFN331 to the number listed at the top, you can answer this question, and then once we get a couple, we'll kind of shoot through them quick and then move along. Starting to see a lot of coffee and phone and red charts. The ACT website is a good one. I've used that one countless amount of times. I know for me personally, if I didn't have my calendar or day timer, like I've seen a few times, I'd totally forget what's going on every day. Google is a great one.
I'm assuming the little booklets are the ones that you get at the practice facilitator training, and those are amazing.
Yeah, super helpful. I've pulled those out a couple of times after coming back from vacation. Just to, like, kind of refresh
Absolutely.
your Outlook calendar, websites, food and coffee. EMR tip sheets are another great one. I think that's probably good. In the interest of time, we can keep on moving along. Kind of the style that we're going to be going around our presenters today is going to be kind of like a rapid round sort of deal. We'll have practice
I know, me neither. I need them all to pull it. Do you want me to pull it down? Oh, okay.
Sorry. Practice facilitators will be sharing tools or resources that they found useful in their everyday work, and we're just going to kind of keep it short and then have a whole bunch of resources that you can later dig into if you find any of them interesting. So our first presenter is Brittany from Edmonton Southside PCN. She's an improvement facilitator, practice facilitator, clinical educator, and healthy aging social worker. So I can pass it on to Brittany. The if you want to go through your slides.
Hi, thanks. So I work at the Edmonton Southside PCN, and we're a large urban PCN. We have about 300 doctors and 100 clinics, and our QI has expanded quite a bit over the years. We now have 5 improvement facilitators, 3 EMR consultants, and about 25 panel management assistants that work in 40 of our clinics. And they work decentralized, so they're really integrated into the clinic team, and they use the clinic's EMR, they use their NetCare access to look up patient information, and they call patients. And when we started this position, it was really open, and we hoped that the clinics would sort of figure out what worked. And we're trying to become a bit more structured now, and we have seen what works, and we've turned this into a menu that we provide our clinics when we're trying to integrate a PMA and review how their work is going. It's a bit of it's about our expectations for the role, and to help make sure that they're covering the type of work that we'd like them to be covering, but it also it's a pretty good layout for clinics to know what they can expect from this work and how we're going to go about it. So if we just want to go to the next slide, I can walk us through this tool that we came up with. So the first part we explained to clinics on this menu is that we'd like to start with a bit of panel cleanup. If it's a really small practice and fairly new, they might not have a lot of panel cleanup. So we look at the patients who haven't been to clinic in 3 years. And ideally, we'd like to be contacting those patients, but we know often the first time those can be thousands of patients that have not had contact with the clinic in 3 years. So often what we say is the first thing we'll do is inactivate those patients, and then going forward at a regular interval, we'll make sure that we're looking those patients up individually or contacting them so that they're not falling through the cracks, but also that we're trying to make sure that the panel stays clean. And that's a little bit less overwhelming once you're doing all of the other outreach on this panel or on this tool. It becomes a lot less patients that show up on this panel cleanup list. We then explained just about access, that we'll be measuring TNA in clinic, and then we can set any clinic-specific goals around access. Opportunistic screening is an area where we have found that clinics really see the value in this, and the panel management assistant flagging patients who are due for opportunistic screening, usually related to the ASAP menu. And they often will update the EMR goals or EMR notifications or ASAP template based on information from NetCare and that they're pulling into the EMR. But we want to make sure that the PMA's time is really effective and that the clinic is being efficient. And so we try to promote that this work be as automated as possible, so that if their EMR allows automated notifications or rules or goals, which most of them do, that we're using those so that there isn't somebody manually typing into the schedule patient due for PAP or manually creating pop-ups that then have to be manually removed. We try to promote that they set up their automated notifications that pull directly from results. And in the PMA, at most, what we try to promote is that they're confirming that those are correct and pulling in correct data from NetCare and the EMR. We also try to promote that their templates, like the ASAP template, are also as automated as possible so that they're not having to search through patient charts looking for blood pressures and height and weights, that this should all be coming into the ASAP template and any other templates that the clinic is using. And switch to the next slide. So this is where we have really seen a lot of value in our clinics, is the patient outreach. We view this as a really valuable part of the panel manager role and of moving a clinic towards becoming a patient's medical home, because we're creating a safety net so that patients aren't falling through the cracks. And where we found a good place to start is by looking at patients who have not presented to clinic at all in 1 year. So if we're going to do outreach for cancer screening, we want to start with the patients who haven't come to clinic at all in the past 12 months. If they've they may be due, but they may have had a discussion recently about or given a requisition or offered a PAP that they denied. So by starting with the ones who haven't come in, we're finding patients who haven't even had the opportunity to have that conversation in a while. We're also finding patients that are no longer attached to the clinic. So by doing this outreach, we're finding at-risk patients and also often doing some of that panel cleanup as we go along. If our clinics don't have good access when we're integrating our panel manager, we will offer that they could prepare requisitions and offer patients requisitions for FIT, mammogram, diabetes screening, lipid screening, and then the patients could just be booked into clinic once the results come in. We also offer that our registered nurses who work in the clinics could also help do the PAP tests because they are all trained and able to do that, so that we're not creating an extra burden of workload for clinics who aren't in the place where they can handle that extra work. The next area we focus on is patients who have a diagnosis of diabetes and haven't come to the clinic in 1 year. There's a few reasons we picked diabetes. One is that it's pretty easy to find in EMRs. Typically, the code 250 is used, or a few well-known variations of diabetes are used in the profile or problem list. So it's easy for us to find this group of patients. It's pretty commonly accepted that this group of patients should be checked in at least once a year for their diabetes and because they're at high risk for many other conditions. And our nurses and clinics are well trained with diabetes management. So we can offer to book these patients with the nurse for a diabetes follow-up visit and foot exam, and then to see the physician after for a checkup. In doing this, again, we find about 80% of patients that you pull on these initial lists are no longer attached to the clinic. Many have moved, have a new doctor, or are deceased. But the 20% that we find are usually pretty high risk. These are often clinics that feel like they have a really good process around diabetes management. They might see their patients on a regular basis, they think, and then we find these patients that have sort of fallen through the cracks. So in one of our clinics, we found patients who had, the doctor said that they would have been on their way to amputation or dialysis if they hadn't been caught by this process. And then the last outreach that we promote is patients who are 75 years and older who haven't come to the clinic in 1 year. And the reason we promote that is because the cancer screening outreach ends at 74. So it's just a way of making sure that our older adult patients are also not falling through the cracks and they can be booked for a checkup. So all of this keeps the panel clean, and it really helps our patients and makes sure that our high-risk patients aren't falling through the cracks. We also are still flexible with clinics, and we ask them if there's any other populations that they'd like to focus on. So some clinics are also doing patients who haven't come in a certain amount of time and have COPD or hypertension or history of cancer diagnosis. So there's a lot of different work we can do around this. We have one clinic that has a high prevalence of hepatitis B, and their PMA is calling patients who have hepatitis B and haven't had a liver function test in the past 6 months. So it's a pretty good process, and the clinics see the value in this pretty quickly. We can go to the next slide. And then the last area that we promote to clinics with the panel manager role is that we say that they could identify certain populations for the clinics by pulling lists. So CCP, we realize this one might be changing soon, but we'd rather the PMAs not focus exclusively on CCP outreach because it is meant to be a clinical decision if patients are booked for complex care plans. So what we offer is that we could pull a list of patients that the EMR shows are eligible, and the doctor can go through that list and indicate patients that they want the clinic to book follow-up with. We also offer to identify patients who are prescribed opioids, and then we, the IFs or practice facilitators would try to come up with a plan with the clinic about how they'd like to manage those patients, whether they might just have a flag on the chart so that staff are aware if they have an opioid prescription and if they need any opioid agreement on file. And then again, we offer if there's any other populations that they'd like help identifying that the panel manager can support with that. So that's our tool. It's double-sided, so the back side gives gives a lot more details about everything I just went over, and it's a pretty helpful resource for us when trying to explain what this position can mean for clinics, and also to kind of keep them on track with the work that we know is really valuable.
Awesome, thanks, Brittany. I like how you use it as like it's almost like a quick diagram to just quickly show physicians about how a practice facilitator can help. So I know doctors like to have that quick summarized stuff to go through. Moving right along, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Curtis. She's going to go over some RACI diagrams and how they've adapted uses for practice facilitators. So I'll pass it right along, and Rebecca, you can continue on.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm from the Calgary West Central PCN. I also tend to talk a little quickly, so if that's the case, Matt, please just interrupt me and tell me to slow down. But I'm going to be talking about a RACI diagram or a RACI matrix, which is a project management tool. And if you're familiar with the more traditional project management processes, this will be familiar, but we've adapted it in quite a few ways to fit kind of the different world of managing improvement projects in primary healthcare. So next slide, please. Thank you. So RACI diagrams or RACI matrix. I'll touch on the definitions in a moment, but at a very baseline, a RACI takes a project or a goal and you're parsing it out into each task. So at a glance, it breaks down who is involved in a project and how are they involved. It's looking at who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each one of those tasks. We also use the term project planner, which is perhaps more applicable to the very many modifications that we've made from this more traditional set here. So next slide. Thank you. So just to kind of define what a RACI is, it defines, again, different people involved in each separate task. So who is responsible is who is actually carrying out that task in question. Who is accountable, and that's who's accountable for the correct completion of the task. So responsible might be us as a practice facilitator, and accountable might be you as a practice facilitator. It could be your manager. It could be the whole PCN, depending on the scope of what you're looking at. Consulted is who's involved usually before moving forward with a task. So it's that information gathering piece, and that helps you to lay out who you kind of need to connect with before moving forward. And lastly is informed, and that's looking at who needs to know about the task, about the progress that you're making or when it's completed at the end of the project. So RACI, the way at least I use it, is a very living document, and it's constantly being edited and adapted as we move through a project. Since, as I'm sure you're all familiar, things don't always go exactly to plan. But by setting it all out in the beginning, it really lets you to map out where you want to go. And it's not necessarily set in stone, but kind of, again, gives that more concrete overview. Next, please. So that was the kind of basic RACI, very high-level overview, and we have adapted it greatly for some different uses. And I'll go through those examples in a second, but I've used it for project management. The co-design team, we've used it actually as a way to track some evaluation measures. I love lists, so I often use it on a personal level for looking at tasks so that I can see where I'm at with different things. And I put a wins and a warnings chart here. I thought versus pros and cons, since cons implies more of like a shortcoming, warnings are just things that I would be mindful of moving in if you do decide to adopt using this tool. So to run through that, on both the wins and the warning sign, I put it requires planning. I think this is a great thing. It allows you to lay out your project from the very start. But just a heads up, it does require planning and for you to take that time to break down a project into those tasks, which of course can require time and energy and doing a lot of that front loading. Other wins include, if you're familiar with Excel, you can do it in Excel and it's really easy. It's easy to print and share. It's a familiar program that many of us use. It allows you to break down those projects and tasks into more digestible pieces, which sometimes is really nice. As practice facilitators, we're often given really large undertakings. So it's nice to see all the support involved. So something like, coming down from the province, we're all working on opioids or such. So it's nice to take that huge topic and break it down to within a project, what are you actually looking at? And again, all the support in all those people who are involved. Some of the warnings, aside from time, if you're not familiar with Excel, it might just take a little time to get used to a new program. Because it is a living document, if you're using it in a team setting, you just need to make sure that someone is responsible for keeping it updated and accessible. So making sure that, if you're assigning people certain titles or you're telling them that they're accountable for a task, make sure they know that. And just depending on how you use it, this can become quite large, which is nice because it's Excel and there's so many options, but I do find that sometimes it can be many rows, but that's kind of the beauty of being able to filter. So next, please. So just quickly, I wanted to run through a few ways that I've used it. They're going to look very different in the traditional sense, but I think that's just one of the great things about Eracy is it's, this framework that you can work within. So in regards to project management, in a clinic setting, if you're working on a quality improvement project of some sort, you can break it down by your actual project, which will allow you to filter down the line, your actual tasks, so what needs to occur, whether that's generating a list or touching base with the physician or the team, looking at the activity owner. So this combined basically that responsible and accountable boxes, just since in many cases these tended to be the same person. As well, consulted isn't there, but in our case that was implied because it's team-based care that everyone would have a hand in that. We still have someone who's informed. That might be the clinic, that might be your manager, that might be a certain member on the team. We included a proposed timeline, allowed us to lay out all of our tasks and then assign some sense of order those needed to happen in, which basically allowed us to fit a Gantt chart within a different tool, which was kind of cool. We have a status bar, and I've actually programmed it in our use that it turns green once you write completed, which is very satisfying. But we can also have, whether it's something that's repeated on a monthly basis, in progress, you can keep track if something's been abandoned along the way. And then just additional notes, because we use it as a team tool, it allows any context to be added. So next slide. This is just an example I made up, but of how it could be used. So looking at something like screening, you can break that into many tasks that might happen, as we heard previously. So whether perhaps you've completed creating all those rules in the EMR, but things like tracking them or generating lists or outreach and might be things that are ongoing or in progress. And next. So we really, to really stretch the Eracy boundaries, we use this in a form of evaluation. Like I said, we've used it with the co-design team, and it's allowing us to kind of lay out by objectives those activities within objectives and kind of see at a picture glance how things are going and where we might need to delve a little deeper, so that we can really make sure that we're hitting on that vision, values, and mission that we mentioned earlier. So in a very similar way to the project management way, it's just laid out in a bunch of categories that we found applicable. Is there something that we can measure? Is it just a yes or no? What's the action, and then kind of who is actioning? Next, please. And so this is a third example. It's a personal task manager. Again, I've just made up examples. I would love the Calm Clinic to be a thing, but I love lists, and this is just a very formatted list. It allows you to filter through. Again, I have dates because that helps me along, seeing who I need to talk to, and next step. So just kind of keeping everything together. And next. So just kind of to some in there. Project planners or RACI diagrams, I really, really want to emphasize that they're adaptable to your needs, but are a great framework to work within if you're working in that team-based care. It is a project management tool, and it can be used right at that start of your project to really dig down and think about what the tasks and steps are involved and who's going to be involved along the way. It allows you to map out those connections that will be needed, and perhaps people who aren't directly on your team, which might change your timeline if you're, waiting to hear from a different physician or hearing back from someone you're collaborating with. It might allow you to kind of look at the order of operations you want to work in. And again, I think it's really easy formatting. It's familiar, so it's nice to work with many people on. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. If anyone has any questions along the way, I'll just remind you, if our chat's not working, you can send an email to the PF admin email, and we'll make sure that those get answered. So next, I'll introduce Natasha. She's a registered dietitian, and I can let her tell a little bit more about herself. So if you want to take it away,
yes,
Natasha.
Thank you so much. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I just thought I'll tell you a bit about myself. I'm Natasha. I'm a registered dietitian, but I worked with Kalina Country PCN for probably around 6 years now, and we are busy with a pilot project called Reducing the Impact of Financial Strain. And so for that project, I've been brought on as the Community Innovation Liaison and Quality Improvement Facilitator. And so to help me with my quality improvement work, I did the Practice Facilitator course core training in October and November of last year. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. And so as part of this core training, there was a pre-training module for the Practice Facilitator training, and it was called the Alberta Primary Care Context. You can go to the next slide. It consists of 12 lessons, and as I said previously, it was part of the training and was developed by AMA, and it took about 1.5 hours, and it was very nice that it would actually be useful even for physicians to take, as there's also CME credits. And so you can go to the next slide. And so I tried to kind of summarize the module to best give an explanation, but it was such a good module. It was very interactive, and so I felt like I wasn't able to do it justice with the presentation, but I hope to kind of just highlight some key things that I found that was really helpful as I went through the module. So the first lesson was just the introduction, and the second lesson was on primary care and where patients come first, and so it just gave a bit of an introduction of the primary care role. So I felt like this was a really good module, especially for new employees, if they don't know anything about primary care or the primary care network. So you can go to the next slide. And again, this was also really informative about the introduction to primary care networks. Even though I've worked for the primary care network for 6 years, there was a lot of information that I didn't quite know, and I knew there was some form of PCN funding, and I knew some form of the 4-cut funding methodology, but this kind of went into detail, and there was lots of links, so you could do extra reading. There was also the additional information from the Health Quality Council of Alberta and the Alberta Health Report, so there's lots of statistics, so I felt the physicians always love statistics, and if you can go back to them, it would be an excellent resource if you need some extra information on primary care and what primary care networks are doing in the province. You can go to the next slide. And so in lesson 4, I just felt like this statement was really powerful about a family practice being defined by its patients as the place they feel most comfortable, most at home to be present and discuss their personal and family health and medical concerns. And this was also, once again, there's lots of links throughout the module, and then it kind of gives you a link to the actual College of Family Physicians Vision of Canada report. So you can go to the next slide. Again, this is just as you go through the module, there's lots of links, and the patient medical home was one of the steps and kind of where we are at as a province. You can go to the next slide. The Vision of Canada, and again, I just kind of included so that you can see how interactive and how many aspects are to the module. You can go to the next slide. Again, it just introduces that patient medical home, and during the course, they go into great detail around the patient medical home, but it just gives you a good indicator and that first glance of what is the patient medical home and the different implementation elements. You can go to the next slide. And then it always also highlighted the podcast, the One Nail at a Time. And if anyone hasn't gone through the podcast, these are really great. I really enjoyed them and found them very informative. So they are available on any of the anywhere you can find a podcast, they are available. So everyone should definitely go and have a listen. You can take the next slide. Again, this was part of lesson 5. I kind of just did a screenshot here, and as you can see, there's like lots of very interactive. You can click on each element of the patient medical home, and it actually highlights and gives you a definition of each of these different implementation elements. So again, it's really informative, and it gives you the how of implementing the patient medical home. You can go to the next slide. Lesson 6 was based on the introduction to the health neighborhood, and it gives that continuum of care for the patients. It highlights how to build a strong primary care health system, the system sustainability, and how to strengthen the health ecosystem. So again, I just kind of highlighted what was important for me for that lesson. You can do the next slide. This slide, I really, what I found from this lesson was about the change agents, and that they are individuals who promote and support a new way of doing something. So this was also a really interactive and nice lesson to give you an introduction of what a change agent is and what they do. You can do the next slide. Lesson 8 was around diffusion of innovation, and again, it was very interactive. You could click on each of the different characters or the different areas of the curve, and it would kind of give you an explanation of each area. So again, it was a really good introduction, even though we went into it in greater detail during the course. It gives you that broad overview of what to expect. So sure, next slide. The change packages. So again, it just gives you that introduction to the different change packages. And this was also, again, very interactive. You could click on each of the little icons, and it gives you more information on them. You can go to the next slide. So lesson 10 was just a test, so you could test whether you learned a lot from the module. And then the next slide it just gives you more information about what the practice facilitator course actually entails. And then lesson 12 actually takes the next slide and takes the physician to the next steps of how they could get their CME credits. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Natasha. So our next resource, I'll be presenting on it. It's coming from the Grand Prairie Primary Care Network, where I am. The guy who's in charge of it, our communications, head of communications, Judd, he's on vacation right now, so I took over his post.
Okay, so let's see.
So to get started, it turns out that Alberta had some of the highest utilization on podcast listeners in adults. So with that, we kind of made a choice to be a little creative, and we started the Grand Prairie PCN podcast titled Your Partner in Health, and it aired about 1 year ago. It's on every major podcast stream, the Apple, Google, Spotify, and I can't remember the other one, but and like I said, it's managed by our head of communications, Judd Dowhy, and he not only helps us develop like storylines for when we're speaking and discussion points, but he's our narrator and kind of fully edits and publishes the finished product. So he does a lot of work in these, and they turn out really well. And initially when we started them, practice facilitators, we didn't have much dealings with the podcast, and it was mostly working with our healthcare providers to address the needs identified in our community. So it was like a lot of kinesiologists, mental health, social work, dietitian. There's a lot of kind of addressing healthcare issues, more like that. So if you want to go to the next slide. So in the last year, we kind of had a change of governance in terms of our board of directors, and I guess let's just say they're much more open to change than our previous board of directors, so which is a great thing. It just made us really busy. So with that change in governance came a lot of changes in my department, and my department, the way that our PCN operates is all of our practice facilitators are under kind of one department. So, and then we go out into the community and work in the clinics from there. So one thing we noticed is that we could utilize podcasts to support change culture, and not only in the public community, but we made a few episodes that we could make relevant in encouraging clinics as well. So that's where we kind of got a little creative. And we can go to the next slide. So I guess podcast title that we kind of made relevant to improvement facilitators was one on naloxone education to help address the opioid crisis. We consulted with one of our physicians who work at the Northern Addiction Center here in Grand Prairie, and we got one of our opioid response coordinators in the North Zone. Her name's Jillian, and she's the one that spoke in the podcast. She also has a history with it being an improvement facilitator, so she's done the training, and she was a perfect candidate to kind of take on this role because coming from both healthcare background and a practice facilitator background, it just fit nicely. And then to quote from a bit of the descriptive of the episode, it's kind of a walkthrough of the basics of opioid poisoning and the life-saving naloxone kit. Some other topics that were brought up is just kind of the general stuff, what opioids are, what they're used for, the effects, common names, like both illegal and illegal, risks associated, what's found in the kits, what naloxone is, and where you can get them in our community. It's just kind of specific to our community, but there's some general information like pharmacies and more broader spectrum like that. So that's kind of how us as practice facilitators got a little bit involved in this podcast stuff, because it's kind of designed to be both for public community, but we use it for clinics as well, mostly as an intro if they're wondering about like vocabulary, the state of the opioid crisis, how our community looks right now, and kind of potential areas that they could get involved. It doesn't speak like directly how they get involved, but when you listen to it from a clinic perspective, you can kind of derive ideas and points that we make on what they could introduce into their practice to help, which usually comes back to us as practice facilitators, and then we help them out with that. So that's kind of how we utilize the podcast that we made from a practice facilitator's perspective. Next slide. And then just as like a kind of future project thing that we have coming down the pipe, it's a little more related to the practice facilitator role, so we're a little more involved. It kind of falls in line with CI and CPAR, and it's a discussion about the importance of verifying your demographic information when you go to a doctor's office. So it's kind of why it's a good thing, why your doctor's office should ask, and maybe kind of why you as a patient should expect that. Not only so we're not kind of driving it down from the clinic side, we're kind of going to the public side as well, to as a patient in the community, why I should expect my doctor's office to confirm all this stuff, because they want to make sure I'm the right person or nothing's changed in my life, and it's, kind of a health confirmation in case anything happens. Kind of a future thing we have. Next slide. This one I kind of made up just to address utilization or incorporating this as a resource as a practice facilitator. I don't see it as necessarily an improvement tool. We kind of saw it as more of an improvement investment, because we use the podcast every once in a while to spread change culture and information to the public, which could loop back to us as practice facilitators. Like if the clinic notices enough patients asking about this stuff, maybe they'll come to us to ask about it, kind of thing. So it's kind of a small way that we address barriers that we've run into, with regarding things like patient verification, putting some attention towards the opioid crisis. It's just an audio resource that's always available and always working. So kind of takes, it's like an extra person working for you in the background if people utilize the podcast. And it reaches more people than we ever could going out face-to-face, like on foot. I don't know if healthy propaganda is the right word to use, but that's kind of what we see it as. And then keep in mind to look at things through the lens of your own PCN. So this may be a potential resource to utilize. If you're interested, you can obviously go take a listen. Some information might be relevant, some probably won't, but we just identified that our community utilizes podcasts a lot, so we thought we'd take a shot at it. And if you identify that your community of patients maybe use it a lot, maybe you guys could get making your own and put it out there. So that's kind of all I have to say on our resource of podcasts. If anybody has any questions, feel free to email the PF admin email, and I'd be happy to connect up with you. So I'll just continue right along, I guess, because we have another very similar topic in podcasts, and I'll introduce Michelle Henne from the AMA.
All right, thank you. So a shout out to Natasha for already kind of plugging these podcasts. That's fantastic. So we just wanted to let you know, if you hadn't heard of them already, our podcast called One Nail at a Time, Insights for Building Your Patient's Medical Home, is targeting physicians and teams who we would consider to be in that early majority group. So they've maybe heard about patients' medical home, but they really need to see some evidence of how it's working for others. Oh, sorry, you can advance this slide now. There we go. So they want to hear about how it's working for others, and they want some really specific, concrete, practical ideas for what they can do to get started. The overall message that the name reflects is that it takes time to transform a practice into a medical home. And so we really encourage just getting started with one implementation element or one nail, and that's really all they need to think about. We, in those sessions that have been recorded, practice facilitators come up quite frequently. So we're really happy when we can drive that nail home in particular. You can advance the slide. Whoop. Oh, what happened? I think we went.
I'm not sure. Let me try and fix that.
I think we are on slide 52, if that helps.
There we go. So, the slide there just shows a picture of the three hosts. So that is Lori Choma, that you all know and love, Dr. Brad Baylor, and me. And so it's always usually two of us who are doing the interviews. And that is the microphone, the fancy microphone that we use, and the Podcasting for Dummies book that we literally do refer to more frequently than we'd like to admit to. We like to interview some of the early adopters that are out there that have kind of been down the road already. And those are great interviews, but really what we're trying to focus on are finding those physicians and teams who are maybe just quietly doing something really interesting in one aspect of patients' medical home, and they don't even realize that what they're doing is kind of cool or special. So those are the ones we love to interview, and to find them, we really kind of rely on people like you who are out in the field working in the clinic. So if you come across a clinic and you think, wow, this is really cool, I think other people would be interested in hearing about it, please let us know, and we would love to go out and interview that group or that clinic or physician and team members within the clinic. Next slide. So we just actually posted our 11th podcast the other day. So what you won't see on here is the most recent one, which was about access with Dr. Janet Craig. And we also have another one that will be posted within the next week or so. And that one's really cool because it's with a family physician, a PCN, RN, and a patient, which is a first for us. And you'll notice that all of the episodes relate back to one of the implementation elements of patients' medical home. So we're really trying to give some information and opportunities to people who maybe want to start in a particular place. So we're trying to mix it up and give information about a variety of the elements. And so I guess the message for you as practice facilitators going forward, if you have physicians or team members that you run across who are maybe newer to the PMH concept and they really want to learn a little bit more about what others are doing, feel free to send them the link to a specific podcast that maybe is related to that area that they're interested in. Or, if you think that you can use one of these to kind of hook them or give them a little more information, you can send links that it's available on any of the major podcasting platforms, but you can just send one individual link. So that's one way to get them into it if you're interested. And between all the things we've heard today, it sounds like you could keep them pretty busy listening to different podcasts. So yeah, and if you have any questions, please just email me or Lori, and we would be happy to answer your questions and hear about your ideas for other podcasts that we could do. Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. So in the last 5 minutes before we close off the call, we're just going to have a couple more Poll Everywhere questions, just really quick. So if you want to jump on your web browser or text in, whichever you chose, and just answer the question if you'll use any of the tools presented today. Or if you already have, maybe you already have.
I think you have to be on your phone and you have to text it.
100%, definitely looks good. Couple I don't knows. And again, if anyone has any further questions or wants more details, any of the presenters today will be more than happy to answer your questions or concerns. Feel free to shoot them an email or the PF admin email, and we can connect you. And then if we want to go to the next slide, looks like most people will be using tools today, so that's a great sign. The next question for Poll Everywhere we'd like to ask is if there are some other tools or resources that would make your life easier that maybe we could use in a future presentation, or find some resources that we can connect you with, and feel free to be creative.
Any of these things are like acronyms or buzzwords. I have a
Panel management tools, magic wand, that'd be definitely helpful. Robots that clean panel, I would use that too. Tool to better organize meeting notes on the fly. Clinic process tracking tool that's easy to use. A lot of great stuff. Artificial intelligence. Storyboards, that's a good one.
something on Amazon. Digitize your whiteboard. Oh.
Wireless projector, that'd be handy. Web calls to contact doctors. These are all great. I guess on the interest of time on Gilles, do you want to jump to the next slide and I can close everything out? So like I said earlier, all the resources today will be shared on the Practice Facilitator Network Collaborate site. You can go there to find additional resources and other relevant website links, as well as previous presentations and webinars that we've done in the past. And the website's just listed down at the bottom there, pcnpmo.ca. If you or anyone you know would like to join the Collaborate, just send an email to the PF admin at PCNPMO. In the subject, just say you'd like to join the Collaborate website, include your name, email, phone number, and the organization you work for. And you'll get an email back shortly with your login information.
Hey, Matt, just before we finish up on that topic, most of you who get the discussion board notifications will see that the PCNPMO site is actually being shut down, and everything will be at the new act.albertadoctors.org. So you'll get another heads up when that move changes. You should be redirected. However, if you have the link favorited, then you may need to reset those. But you'll be getting another notification when that actually happens, but just another heads up that migration will be happening soon. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. It's good to know. And then just in closing, with our Collaborate website, we kind of already addressed it. We have a couple different sources of resources with emails, webinars. You can check the Collaborate website to see past links. So one more slide we have with the poll everywhere. If you just want to let us know how we did today, your feedback is greatly appreciated. Seeing a lot of smiley faces, so that's good to see. And with that, we're at 3:02 p.m., so I'd like to thank everybody for joining the call today, and thanks to all of our speakers.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.